Hi, everyone. Welcome to our thanks. It's just about time to start. It's about 1:59, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and get started. Just wanted to say welcome to everyone. So glad you could be with us on this rainy Sunday, the Cinco de Mayo. Um, and also our very last session. I can't believe how fast the time has gone. And we've arrived at our final session where the theme song of Friends is quite fitting in terms of today's topic is acting as a peer mental health navigator. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what are some of the resources out there that after today, you can continue to not only have conversations about mental health, but also understand what are those resources out there that can support people in our community, national, state, and local resources. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. And with that, we'll go ahead and just reminders about Zoom. By now, you all are familiar with these. So just take a look at these commands. I think by now you know how to use the emojis on our computers and in Zoom and reactions, etc. It helps us to have more of that community feel together. Also, if you all probably know this by now, but if you're logging in with a different phone or a different computer, if you could please go up to your name and you can rename yourself if it's like a phone number or not obvious who you are. That helps us as we keep attendance, but also when you're wanting to make comments, we can call on you by the name that you prefer. And also you can add your pronouns as well. So today we will start always with our land acknowledgement. We'll have an icebreaker that Sandra will lead us in and talk also about the Padlet discussion. And then we are going to start off today with Shakira talking about self-care and how important it is that we take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of others. We will have a guest later in the session, one of our alum peer mental health navigators, Calvin Trin, who also has worked as a crisis counselor, and 988 will be coming to talk about his insights on 988 and also help to answer questions that you all may have. We will have some scenarios today in breakout, and we're treating this a lot like a scavenger hunt. So while there could be multiple answers, what we'll do as groups is try and figure out, based on our own mental health matters resource directory, which of the resources you would perhaps recommend if you were in that particular scenario, and then we'll come back and debrief about that. And then we'll end, of course, today with some Q&A and then have our closing and celebration of all of these weeks of hard work that you've had. So thank you so much. And I'm going to now turn the time over to Edith for our land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. Alrighty. So, for the land acknowledgement, we want to acknowledge that we are living and working in the territory and in the waters of the Salish Coast peoples. As uninvited guests, we are operating in the lands bordering the waters shared by all of the Upper Puget Sound tribes, which include the Lumi, Nooksack, Stillaguamish, Samish, Swinomish, Upper Skagit, Tulalip, and Snohomish. We also recognize that many enslaved and contracted peoples were forced to dedicate their work to the construction of what is now Washington and the surrounding areas. For these people and their descendants, we recognize their indelible mark in the spaces in which we live and gather. Finally, in recognizing that this land is colonized indigenous territory, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the stories and later lives of these events and to honor, protect, and sustain this land. I'll pass it on is to Anna. Is she on?
I will take, yeah, I can go ahead and do that. As always, is part of our pleasure and excitement to see an opportunity to celebrate and all of those who have worked really hard amidst all the things that you have to do, because we recognize that this is not the only thing that you are responsible for. So we're happy to celebrate those who have managed to finish lesson 5. So yay to all of you. Next slide, please. And we also have a group of those who have finished the program. And what that means is that you are now part of a larger community that is focused on reducing stigma. And I am so, so proud of you again, because we know that this is not the only thing you're responsible for. So congratulations, you are now able to get your certificate, a big hug, a lot of celebration, and also our gift to you for the time that you have committed. We understand that whatever we offer you can never really compensate you for your heart and your effort, but we want to recognize that as well. Next slide, please. So with that, before I forget, you can pick your certificates and gift cards in a number of ways, and Jody has listed those on our chat. And one of the best ways, at least our favorite way for you to receive is if you can come to our celebration and our event on May 9th between 1 and 7. We would love to be able to meet you in person and give you both your certificate and your gift card. So moving on to the icebreaker, one of the first questions that we have is a very basic one, and we kind of know the answer to that. But we want to hear from you. So if you can write on the chat, what excites you most about being a peer mental health navigator, that would be a great way to warm us up today. So please feel free to share on by writing or coming briefly out of mute to share with us what excites you most about this new role that you're embarking on. And Jasmine says, learning more about mental health resources that you can share, being able to help navigate the mental health system is what Skylar says, breaking the stigma in our Latino community, the new knowledge you've gained, and to be more effective and helping those. Greg says that he felt he couldn't before. Being able to have a more honest talk with community, that is so important in the reduction of stigma. Excited to be able to help. That's why we're here, right? Sharing mental health resources, being able to help through our community, and feeling confident, having that knowledge so you can support better and increase knowledge and confidence to share and break that stigma. Feel more comfortable talking about mental health, being present for people, having the ideas, making sure it is so important that people don't feel alone in their challenges, learning more about how and with what to help in mental health. Your shares have more inclusive and respectful language in talking about mental health. That's one of the most important places where we start. And I really think that you have gotten the main purpose of what we're here to do. We are in the community. We are the eyes, ears, and heart of the people that we serve. So by having the resources and the information you have now, you can feel much more confident in the role that comes with being a mental health navigator. So our next question is, what concerns do you have about being a peer mental health navigator? I think that is a really important question. And I'm very confident myself that you understand the scope of work, that that you are clear about what you are not supposed to do. We don't give advice. We don't diagnose. And I'm reading here now some of the the concerns you have, where to find all the resources. That is exactly what we're here for, Skylar, and having clear boundaries. And one thing that's important to understand is that we're not here to save anyone. We're here to support, and the boundaries are very individual. You have to consider what you need to take care of yourself, because we cannot give up out of an empty cup, right? And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, because in order for you to be of service in a way that it's a win-win, a win for the community, a win for you, and win for this program, is to make sure that you always take good care of yourselves. And an example that we always like to give is the one you've heard a million times when we are in an airplane, and the flight attendants always say that you have to put your mask on first before you try to help anyone. So hopefully the information we'll be sharing today, including the resources, will make you feel a lot more comfortable when knowing where your boundaries need to lie, what you can and cannot do, and how to balance your heart and your skills in service of community. So next slide, please. So if we can click on the Padlet real quick. I had a chance to read some of the ideas and the suggestions and the techniques that you use to take good care of yourself. And I think I was very impressed, because there has to be that balance, right, between your service and your self-care. But you were very clear about the things, being clear about what you need, a lot of breathing, a lot of self-care that includes, things, basic things like drinking your water, knowing when you need a break. And I was really, really excited to see that most of you who wrote already have techniques that you use, that that are specific to you and that work, and that you, as well as the people in our community, you also are not alone. And we do the best that we can. We have, limited resources when it comes to that, but we want you to know that we're open for questions and for follow-ups, as we were going to continue to be in contact with you, so you will not be alone in this journey. So thank you for those of you who had a chance not only to share with us what your own techniques are, but also share among yourselves, so you can be a resource for others who have taken this training as well. Next slide, please. So with that, I think it's totally appropriate that we left this to the very end to talk to you about what self-care means. And I am really excited that Shakira is going to share with those ideas, because a lot of times in many of our communities, when we think about self-care, we're thinking, well, I don't have money or time to go get a pedicure or a manicure or a facial or a spa, but there are a ton of other ways in which you can make sure that you are taking care of yourself, so you can be there for others. So I'm going to pass it on to Shakira so she can talk to you some more about that.
Thanks, Sandra. And we can go to the next slide. One of the first things we can do in terms of self-care is knowing what are our warning signs for potential burnout. And I once had a boss / mentor describe burnout to me as feeling helplessly hopeless, like no one can help me feel hopeful again, or hopelessly helpful. I don't believe anybody can help me again. And some of the things you might notice if you're feeling burnout, or early warning signs of burnout, is feeling uninspired or hopeless, feeling exhausted or worn out in a way that you just can't rest and feel better again, feeling sick, headaches, stomach aches. You might experience weight loss or gain, or loss of appetite, some of the same things that we see in folks who are struggling with mental health. In a way, we can see in ourselves with potential warning signs of burnout, a lot of worry or anxiety, feeling doubtful or questioning our impact and whether or not we can really be helpful, not feeling motivated to do our jobs, or feeling a low sense of commitment to work. And I love the way, Sandra, the way you put it, learning to balance our heart and our skills. Let's go to the next slide. Is really important in our lives day to day, and particularly when we're thinking about supporting others around mental health or substance use. And like you said, Sandra, I love the, like, you have to put your oxygen mask on first, maybe because I was just traveling recently, and so I got to hear these reminders again. And I think another way we think about this is that you can't pour from an empty cup. When you are feeling empty or depleted, it's really hard then to give to others. And so making sure that you're filling your cup and putting on your oxygen mask first is really essential in how we show up for others and in what allows us to show up for others. For me, thinking about this as sustaining practices, the things that sustain me to do this, I want to do this type of work. I want to be this person in my family and in my community for the long term. And so what are the things that keep you going? What are the things that feel nurturing and sustaining for you? Sometimes, right, it is as simple as moving your body. It doesn't take much money and maybe even just a small pocket of time to get up and stretch, release some tension from your shoulders and your neck, maybe going for a walk, connecting with people and connecting with others, whether that's to get support, to share your stories, to hear their stories. Maybe it's just to have a good laugh, to share a funny meme you saw or receive a funny story that someone has. You can engage in relaxation activities or exercises, and that can be something structured like a breathing activity. One of the breathing things is called box breathing. So think of a box. You inhale for 4, you exhale, or you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4. And there are these things called calm strips. You can order them online. They're just little stickers that remind you about deep breathing. I used to keep one on the back of my phone that helped me remember to do that breathing exercise. But there are other relaxation exercises like tensing all of your muscles, your face, your arms, your legs, everything you can, tense them for 10 seconds and then release it. That's a really beautiful relaxation activity, that the act of tensing everything and then releasing it makes you more relaxed than when you started. This morning, I just stood outside and listened to the rain and the birds and took some deep breaths with the wind, and that really helped ground and relax me. Things like that can really help. Sounds like you are already all thinking about drinking water, staying hydrated, making sure you have the nutrients you need in your body to take care of yourself for this life and this work. Thinking about limiting alcohol or other substances, or being really mindful about when you consume them, maybe even noticing how they make your body feel, right? Sometimes in the moment, it can seem like a really fun thing, and it can be a really fun thing. I like to ask myself personally, how will future me feel about this? When I'm like, yes, another glass of wine, and I'm like, oh, future me might not feel great about that choice. So maybe a glass of water is where I want to go now. Checking in and making sure you're making space to get enough rest, enough sleep is really important. And balancing your desire or need for activity and adventure with your need for rest and recharging is really important. Knowing if you need to recharge alone or if you're someone who likes to recharge with others can be helpful. Spending time in nature or outdoors. It is always amazing to me that science confirms what we know in our bodies and in our souls, and what Indigenous communities have been telling us for time immemorial, is that nature is really healing. It really actually changes our body chemistry, our heart rhythms, to slow them down and help them relax and heal. So that's really good. And similarly, disconnecting from electronics can be really important. While they can be really fun and a way to connect and a way to get distraction, they are also, like everything, best in moderation. And setting healthy boundaries. I saw that a number of folks, Anna, Greg, Kim, I saw you all comment that you're worried about or like thinking about how do you set healthy boundaries in this work. And we'll talk more today again about what you can do as a peer mental health navigator and what maybe is outside of our roles if we're acting as peer mental health navigators. And I guess the thing I want to say too is that sometimes we learn our boundaries when we overstep them, and that's okay. It's okay to have a process of making mistakes and then correcting them, or having an experience where maybe you overextend and that's how you realized, oh, that was a little further than I meant to go or wanted to go. And I think it's really okay also to offer transparency with people that we're supporting, and that's a way also of building relationships, to say, hey, I thought I could hang out with you all day today, but it turns out I'm going to need to wrap up in the next hour or two, and then creating a plan with someone. So thinking about how you thoughtfully set those boundaries as you figure out what your boundaries are is okay. And we can just model with other people that it's okay to be authentic. It's okay to be transparent. It's okay to be human, and to figure that out as we go. And we can talk some more about boundaries as the day goes today and as those questions come up, and if it would be helpful to get a little more specific around what boundaries can look like. Let's go to the next slide. And we just started talking a little earlier about some of these grounding techniques, and these cost you no money and really take 10 to 30 seconds. They actually really don't take very long. Grounding techniques are strategies that help us calm our bodies, feel connected to the present moment, slow down our minds. The most accessible one is breathing. So taking in deep breaths and letting out a really slow breath. So it's really interesting. We sometimes think that with deep breathing, the important part is a deep inhale, but what's really important actually is the letting it go. The exhale is what activates our rest part of our nervous system. 5 senses technique. It's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And that's a grounding activity you can do and that you can offer to someone else when they're feeling activated, to help slow us down and connect to the present moment. And when I'm done talking, I'll pop the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in the chat for you all. Mindfulness is a really great way of being, and we know has incredible mental health and physical health benefits. And it's really about being present to whatever you are doing right now, and to be present without judgment. So even if what we're experiencing feels stressful or uncomfortable or distressing, like worry thoughts, we can notice that without judgment. We can say, wow, I'm feeling really worried right now, or I'm having a lot of worry thoughts right now, without judging it, without saying, oh, that's terrible or it's bad. Sometimes you can just do the dishes mindfully. Notice what the suds of soap and bubbles feel like. Notice what the water temperature feels like. And those things help us get out of the busy brain and into the present moment. Visualization is a great grounding technique. It's one of my favorites. Picturing a place that you love or creating a place that you love in your mind. I know someone who created in her mind a huge library, floor to ceiling shelves full of books, dimly lit, cozy couches and pillows and cushions to sink into while she reads a nice book. And that's where she goes in her mind when she needs a peaceful, safe place to be. And like I said, square breathing, that inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, square, are other great grounding techniques. And we can go to the next slide.
Oh, those are very powerful ideas and suggestions. And what I love particularly about all of them is that they don't require any tools or anything external, that we can use what nature already gave us. And I really appreciated that Shakira shared that science and biology now are supporting what we have known, um, the ability to regulate ourselves under most circumstances, just using our breath. So let that sink in, and we will move into our time with the scenarios, and I'd let Jody tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so each of our groups will have 5 groups today, and your facilitator will share that scenario with you. Noemi, do we have a slide for each of these scenarios? Yes, so facilitators, we can put the link to the slides in the chat, and then when you are in your group, you can actually share your screen and share the scenario for people who would like to be able to read it and have context. But each of the groups will have a specific scenario, and then we have the idea is to check out our Mental Health Matters resource directory from our website. So we can put that link in the chat as well. Let's do that right now. Anna or Edith, actually, I think I have it. So this is on our website, everyone. If you haven't been to our mentalhealthmatterswa.com, if you go to our website, you can see there's on the top of the screen, there's a resources list tab. Yeah, that's our website, but the Google link that I put there is actually from our resource directory. And we try to keep that pretty up to date. And so I just want to also take the opportunity for those of you who might know of other resources that you don't see in this directory, feel free to share it with us and we will add that to this directory. When you read your scenario, you'll have the opportunity to look through the directory to come up with some ideas for, are there particular resources or some more than others that you would recommend, and have a discussion with your group. And then we'll come back and we'll debrief. And hopefully the goal in all of this is for you to become a little bit more familiar with what's the local level, but also state and national resources as well. So I'm going to go ahead, and I think everybody has been assigned a breakout room at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and open them up. We will have about 10 minutes, which means coming back around 2:40 to have our debrief session. And I'm going ahead and open all of the rooms. Facilitators on our agenda, you'll see the scenario assigned, but Sandra and Anna, scenario 1, Edith and Clarissa, scenario 2, and Shakira, scenario 3.
And any of you that may be having a hard time opening the document, that sometimes happens if your your Zoom email is different than the email you sign up for and is requesting for you to request authorization to look into it. So we will come back and have the resources up on the screen as well. But I think that we can probably go ahead and move on to joining the group. So I'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
I think everybody's assigned. Noemi, are you here? Monica?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to fix my camera because I don't know why I cannot see myself.
Oh, you can't see yourself? You know
No,
what?
I don't know what happened.
You know
I see.
what? I had this happen the other day, and when I went to video, like if you
Mhm.
go to video and click on that little arrow, go to video settings. I don't know how I did this, but there is a command. If you go to video settings, it says, let's see, it's hide self view.
No, it's off. So I don't know because
Oh.
I see myself in the beginning, but then I was trying. That's why I go stop and then I go back, and you see. So let me try to log off, and then I'm gonna log on again.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back. Hold on.
That wasn't me. Was that Scout?
No, I don't have Scout. We don't have her until Mindfest.
Oh, okay, I heard a growl, so
I
I
know.
was like,
I heard a little doggy.
it wasn't my tummy.
It might be Bean. It might be Noemi.
No.
Might be Noemi's dog because she's
That's probably Noemi's dog.
yeah, she's still on, I think, with her phone.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see. Wow, we've had like, I think this might be perfect attendance today.
Oh, it is good.
And the quickest that I've ever seen people get into the breakouts.
It's
So
the rain.
I think. And I think they're more comfortable with each other and they know that we're not going to be making anybody feel uncomfortable in those groups, you know? At first it was like there were people that weren't logging into the group, but it's like, okay, we can see that you're not logging into the group. You're
So
still
while we were on session now, the person sent us the lease agreement.
Oh, congrats.
And so now we just have to review it quickly and look at the HOA rules and regulations. He sent
What kind of resources? So just for those who didn't have scenario one, your Pure Mental Health Navigator group has worked hard to complete the training and wants to celebrate together. During a discussion about what to do, a group member told someone else that their idea was boring and stupid. The other person didn't speak the rest of the meeting, but came to you after to say they weren't coming back to the group. Now, this isn't necessarily one where you need the resource directory, but I think it's a very common. We base these on real life scenarios. And so, Sandra, what did your group talk about this particular situation?
I was very proud to hear that even before I asked any of the probing questions, my group went right into active listening of the person whose feelings were hurt. And they were two camps, the one that would tackle it if appropriate, if comfortable, if the situation presented, just modeling for the group how do you deal with conflict in a kind, gentle, thoughtful way. And there were some that felt more comfortable with pulling the person aside right away, right after the meeting, not waiting and to avoid conflict with the person who was inappropriate, what's happening for that person. So so I felt that the empathy, the active listening, the not labeling anyone or anything were points very well expressed by my group. So thank you to my group. Excellent job.
Thank you, Sandra. And Anna, did your group have other insights that you want to share about the scenario? You might be on mute.
Yeah, thank you. No, they were great. They had some good thoughts. And I mean, they echoed a lot of what Sandra's group said, you know, about having a lot of empathy and active listening. One thing that one of them mentioned that if they will be open to have a conversation, that they were offered to mediate between the two people to trying to resolve the situation. Also, not calling out a person during a meeting or in public as that, that way we're being sensitive to individuals. And then also reviewing some expectations about the conversation. Let's see, somebody also said that respectfully challenge the person who made the comments, like one-on-one, right? And that may get the person to open up. So active listening again, and thinking that sometimes hurt people hurt others. So thinking about it, they might be having a bad day, something happened to them, and then maybe thinking in that way, being sensitive to them and trying to help them out. So thank you, group. You did great.
Thank you. All right, scenario 2. And I realize these may not be scenarios related to resources. That might be later in I'm just realizing that. But our scenario 2. So your group of pure mental health navigators wants to plan a community event and you're given a set budget, but during the planning session, you just can't seem to get consensus about how to spend the money. 2 people don't want to spend the money from the budget on food, for example, while several others think food is a must for the event. How do you handle this type of conflict as the team leader? And Edith, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah. So right away, the group identified that to keep an open mind, right? Try to hear the other person's perspective, right? What the 2 people who don't want to spend money from the budget. Try to understand where they're coming from, maybe hear their ideas, maybe they have a better idea. To really empathize, try to understand, be an active listener, and to overall respect everyone's opinion, right? Right or wrong. And yeah, just try to find a solution, see if there's come to a mutual agreement, compromise, and yeah, ask questions. So yeah, those were all kind of the main skills they identified. So thank you to my group for sharing.
Hey, Clarissa, how about your group? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so my group definitely suggested we had Julie and the team in my breakout room actually said that her team, or rather her job, had gone through something very similar and when trying to plan out a community event. So that was really helpful to have kind of like that, her insight on the matter. So she actually suggested like creating a pros and cons list. Might help to really set out like or I guess put things into perspective, especially when it comes to a budget. Also, just in general, finding a compromise. So Sarah also suggested if food is something really important for someone, I'm sure there's different ways that you could try to get donations from different places in order to, again, consider that. I guess it comes down to finding solutions or compromising, right? Even if it's not within the budget, you can always find solutions by reaching out to other people in the community. And yeah, and then just in general, kind of adding on to what Edith said, Annie suggested just being respectful, keeping an open mind, really validating other people's opinions, and then just overall, also adding on to Shakira, those grounding techniques, just, really remaining calm during conflict can be difficult, but we have to remind ourselves that that is really important, especially in a team setting.
Great ideas. Thank you. And then we'll move on to scenario 3. So if someone new comes to your community group, she moved here from another country and doesn't speak much English. You notice that people smile and nod, but they don't make a lot of effort to get to know her. She starts to come less and less. And you were new 2 years ago and moved here from Mexico. So you know what being new feels like. Role play with another person in the group how you might model empathy and support for this person. So Shakira, do you want to talk about that role play, or are there actually people who may want to model this for us?
Yeah, so we did a brainstorm instead of a role play, but I don't know if folks would want to do some role playing or modeling now. I'm happy to share what folks came up with during the brainstorm in our discussion.
Do that. Yeah, let's do that. I get a sense that maybe people are not wanting to be put on the spot with a role play. So yeah.
Yeah, and so it was great. Everybody in the group had lots of awesome ideas and strategies to express, and several folks shared. One thing you can do is sharing if you've had a similar experience of being new somewhere or living in unusual places where you're unfamiliar, letting them know you've been there. If you speak their language of comfort, offering to connect in that language And if you don't speak their language of comfort, remembering to slow down your speech and speak clearly so they can try to understand what you're sharing, or writing things down so that they can see those resources or communications in writing. Someone shared that Google Translate has a microphone you can turn on that can then offer some pretty real-time translation or interpretation of a conversation that you could do. Folks talked about from their own experience encouraging this person to maybe go to community colleges for low cost language classes, or watching movies in English, different ways to help immerse themselves in the language and learn. Folks talked also really beautifully about like using nonverbal communication, that a lot of what we convey, and I shared like the research shows 70 to 90% of communication is actually nonverbal. So having an open body, a smiling face can convey such warmth. Trying to connect over activities that don't require language, like crafts or sports, setting up the snack table in this community group could be helpful, and offering to connect one-on-one with them, offering that you notice they've come less and less as a way of demonstrating that you notice them, they matter, you care, can really go a long way. I think those were some of the nuggets. I think there might have been a little more, but really a lot of demonstrations of empathy and offers for connection the folks came up with.
Wonderful. And everyone likes to be noticed and seen in terms of validating and appreciated. So that's some great advice. We're going to shift now over to the part of our session today where we are going to talk about resources. And with us is one of our very own Pyramidal Health Navigator alums. He's also a graduate from as a BA in Health Studies from the University of Washington, Bothell. And something that's not on here right now is that he is currently in the graduate program in social work, also at UW. And we love having Calvin join us to talk about, he's served as a crisis counselor and is very familiar with 988 and is here to share his insights about 988 and actually answer some of the questions, maybe debunk some of the myths or try to clarify maybe some of the miscommunications about this resource, which is fairly new. So we want to turn a few minutes over to Calvin, and then you all can feel free to post questions in the chat, or we can call on you if you want to unmute yourself. So thank you, Calvin, for being here.
Yeah, of course, and it's a pleasure to always come here and always present about 988. So yeah, talking a little bit about 988. And so 988 has been like a big like distribution of just, instead of using 911 as an emergency service, it's now uses 988 as a 3-digit number to use just to communicate with people that are in crisis that aren't necessarily needed for police or medical staff. And yep, you can put on to the next slide and just put any questions. I'll feel free to answer it as they come. Yeah, so one of the nice things about 988 is that in Washington State, dialing 988 would connect you to the same National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So it's within the local area and around. If it's not King County, it'll most likely be Volunteers of America for that. And so the service includes like crisis intervention, emotional support, and resources referrals for local mental health services, safety planning and follow-up support if needed. They're also really good at referrals, and if 988 can't assist with that, calling 211 is definitely a good option as well. But the difference between 211 is that's limited hours, but 988 is generally a 24-hour crisis line. And the nice thing about 988 is that it's fully confidential, it's free, and it's available, like I said. And if you're experiencing mental health or suicidal crisis, there's people that are trained to specifically talk about it, talk about the crisis and need and help individuals. And you can provide any personal information you would like, but it's not required. And so you can just go in there and talk in case anybody just needs emotional support for the duration of that. Yeah, next slide, please. Recall. I'm gonna just answer a chat really quick. Let's see here. Recall from a cell phone from an area code out of who you connect to. So there are cases where individuals will call out of the county line. So we'll have sometimes people calling from like Idaho, even though they're even though they're from Idaho and they're calling from Washington State, generally what will happen is that a crisis, the screening will probably reroute them all the way to the correct appropriate number. So then, and the reason why we do that is just so then they could provide adequate resources within the region. And sometimes if it's really acute in really cases where, for example, someone's in Idaho was calling and they're presenting with a crisis and they don't want to be transferred at all, then we'll generally take the call. So it's not something that we'll just shift over in case it's from a different state. And yep. And so the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act of 2020, this was just essentially made as a 988 service line for mental health services and prevent individuals from just, if there's any reason that individuals don't want to engage with the police or law enforcement, then this is definitely an alternative route. We'll also have people from 911 get routed to 988 as well. So there is now like a streamline of services that gets connected through 988 now, which is like the 988 is the umbrella, but Crisis Connection is like the organization that gets transferred from 988 calls, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. All right. 988 supports suicide prevention, crisis support nationwide, and linking callers with support. So with all these services right here, I mean, it serves a large variety of populations that are in need, veterans, Lifeline for Spanish line. Essentially, you could call 988 and you could, and this applies to any language too, it's not just Spanish as well, but essentially you could have a translator if they don't speak, the crisis counselor doesn't speak whatever language is provided, then they'll have a language line interpreter on the line. So you'll always ensure that you could actually speak to the individual and receive help with the appropriate language that you speak. And then with the LGBTIQ, and then also with Trevor Project and Native Indigenous people as well. So it serves as a large umbrella for very different niches of population specifically tailored to that. So that's nice. Next slide, please. And out of this graph right here, you can kind of see how, so VOA, Volunteers of America, essentially takes a lot of the portions of the calls that are needed for crisis calls on the all the way on the east side. They have Frontiers of Behavioral Health, and then so Crisis Connections only takes King County, but for referrals we kind of take the umbrella of like King County, Pierce, Lewis, and Clark, but those are different contracts. Those are related to a different service that we provide. And that's kind of like the umbrella of how 988 calls are distributed. So Volunteers of America is a pretty large organization that is a national suicide hotline. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is in regards to the House bill, and just the House bill is essentially what's been passed through the Senate. And so House Bill 1477 is a large-scale planning, which would include crisis system expansion efforts, geographic, cultural, linguistic sensitive services, and founding trauma-informed system and voices from lived experiences. Something about this, and I think this is what stems a lot from, is now there's something called not peer mental navigator, it's peer support specialists now. And these are individuals that have been living with experiences of whether it's mental health conditions or substance use. They're now within a lot of mental health organizations right now, and they support, essentially they walk alongside clients is what we like to say. And they are essentially their counselor, their friend, and just someone that is an expert in their own lives and could also just anecdotally provide lived experiences with them that can relate to someone like a clinician that wouldn't be able to relate. So that's a really helpful thing as well. And another thing too is that with this bill too, they've actually now expanded. Now by 2029, we're supposed to open 6 crisis clinics, which we hope is going to be. I know a lot of social workers in the field are really skeptical about this, but it's a practice that now we're just trying to open more crisis clinics so individuals could go in seeking shelter and see a social worker, case manager, psychiatrist, and nurse as well, just to ensure that they're just having that holistic and comprehensive care. So that's the upcoming expansion. Hopefully it goes through. And next slide, please. Yeah, and 988 was launched. It's been launched for some time now. I want to say it's last year, but it's been a couple of years now. And a little bit about the statistics and the overall mediation of 988 was to reduce 911 police response calls to behavioral health crises. And so that's how the triage essentially occurs. Dispatchers from 911 will transfer to 988 now, which is nice. And there's a lot more future efforts that are being done in Washington State for suicide prevention, like I mentioned, with also the peer support navigators, and then there's also with the expansion of the crisis clinics where you can go in person, and then also with there've been a lot more expansions with like next day appointments, which essentially means that if you ever called and you were in crisis and or an individual you talk to is in crisis, they could request a next day appointment where they could essentially receive services within the 24 to 72 hours that they're in crisis, and this bumps them up to the queue that puts them on the priority list for behavioral services or gets them enrolled in behavioral health agencies. And it's a lot of work and there's a lot of triaging around it. And believe I recently saw that like since July 2022, 98 has received about and routed about 9.6 million calls alone. So that's quite a large sum of crisis calls that are just relative to this year or since 2022. So it's a large need. Next slide, please. Additional resources would be the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act 2020, and then the House bill I mentioned. There's a crisis response. I would probably say if law enforcement is not the alternative to call in case there is like an actual like emergency and there's a behavioral suicide, I would definitely say that a lot of times what we see now is individuals will go in hospitals in the emergency department ask for a social worker, and there will always be a social worker in the hospital generally, and the rotation about that is just to help with providing care. So if someone is like, for example, an active suicide or just unable to take care of their needs or they're in psychosis and whatnot, they could go to a hospital, the nearest hospital they can, ask for a social worker, and they could have that resource for emotional support. And also the social worker will also work with them to get them the adequate resources they need. So that is 988 in a nutshell. And I will
Yeah,
just answer
Calvin.
questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
we've got some questions and some
Mhm.
comments, and
Great.
let's start with those, and then I'll come back to a few that we usually get if nobody asks so far. First, I just want to acknowledge that are people that have never heard about 988. So I'm glad that we are talking about this amazing resource that just keeps getting better as the years go by and as our governments invest in this. So thank you, Calvin, for being here and shining a light on that. Um, you're going to ask, what kind of training or credentials do folks have to have in order to take 988 calls?
So 988, at least with Crisis Connections, and I know for Volunteers Americas, I know some need a bachelor's requirement, but for Crisis Connections specifically, you just go through, I believe it's a 12-week training that you attend on the weekend for, I believe it's like 4 hours every week. And you go through role plays similar to like what being a peer mental health navigator is, but essentially you're just more dialed in into role playing a lot more as you are a client or as you are a caller, how to assess for safety, how to essentially provide emotional support, how to route them, how to get a clinician to essentially help. And one of the nice things about like 988 calls is that there is a phone. So there's a phone worker that takes calls, but there's always going to be someone that, like a clinician that will always be side by side with the phone worker to listen in on calls. So this is something that I've done actually. So after being a peer mental navigator, I actually went to Christ Connection as a volunteer and to be a phone worker. And after being a phone worker, I now work there. So I went full circle with it essentially, and it's one of the nice things that I can empathize with phone workers too, and definitely like communicate with. So it's a nice place to definitely start in, a place to consider as well. It's hard work for sure.
Calvin, how would one go about being trained to become a crisis connections counselor or being part of 988?
hmm So if you go on Crisis Connections, there is a volunteer, and so it goes into cohorts, or it goes, yeah, into essentially cohorts. What you would do is you would go to the volunteer section, and I can put it in here. I'll look it up. You would go into the volunteer section, and then after that, I think it's like every 3 months there's a training process, and when you just sign up, put your name, your information in, and then they'll reach out to you. There's different types of sections. So there's a 24-hour crisis line. There's also warm line and teen link. The difference between those two is that The crisis line just handles more high acuities. Warm line is for more individuals that want to engage in like long-term dialogue, so conversations for which could range up to like 45 minutes plus. So if you're someone that wants to build a rapport a long time and holding a conversation, that's separate. And then Teen Link is for more youth, age appropriate individuals that are just essentially just whether we'd like to separate that population specifically. So there's a large training with that, and so this is the link for that, which you already sent, Jody. Great, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Calvin, are these all volunteer positions, or I think I've seen some in the past that were also paid? Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Mostly for paid, they usually only hire individuals with a bachelor's, and there's a lot of different positions at Crisis Connections. There's what I am as a bachelor level is called a crisis intervention specialist, and there is also like other like departments in that bracket that you can. There's I think they're really flexible. Let's look at this, and I know they're always looking for jobs because I'm always looking at the portal for or the emails that I'm receiving with my work. And let's see. But yeah, there is a lot of different careers you could go into, especially with Crisis Connections or even Volunteer America. Or Volunteer America, I have some colleagues that are there too, and there's a lot of different programs there as well.
Jewel has a comment, and Calvin, I just want to be clear. Like, there is a federal law that if you need medical services, that you could have translation. It's not always executed, but that does exist, and Washington State is trying to do better about language translation. But the question was, if they were to call 988 and they spoke, let's say, Somali, or they spoke a different language, would they be guaranteed to have someone who spoke their language?
So as a protocol, we don't have staff that essentially speak every language, and that's the reality, unfortunately. But the requirement is that if we are speaking to an individual that does speak a different language, then by law we do need to make sure we have an interpreter on the line, and we take this seriously, and not just only at Crisis Connections, but also like in a medical setting as well. So when I work at a clinic as well, like we have to use language line, and we have to make sure that what the translators, and that's one of the big things that we talk about in the field is like as an interpreter, it's really important that they say what the client or what the individual is saying verbatim. And that's one of the difficult things is that, as a if you're trained, especially as a crisis counselor, and you're trying to help someone, manage their emotions or provide emotional support, and it's kind of like you have to talk to a translator, but the translator is going to talk to the client. It's really difficult sometimes to gauge that, and culturally it's a lot different. So generally, yeah, if individuals call from Crisis Connections from a different language, then they will definitely get that language that they are preferred to talk to. So that answers the question.
I was at a meeting recently where they were sharing the stats for Washington State, and one of the things I was share is that some of that information is lagging a year or two, especially when it comes to youth. And another thing that they shared is that the numbers relatively to the entire population in some groups are so small that they don't register into their statistics. But the more we continue to request a specific language, then the investment becomes more meaningful. But we still have a lot of work to do because there are a large number of indigenous languages that are not as easily accessible. So part of our work is to put a light on the need for those in our community that don't speak the top languages that we have in the state, but we still have ways to go from material that is translated in other languages, but it's getting better.
Yeah, for sure. And I do see that as a statistic. The statistic is lagging a lot, where we generally see majority of our crisis call coming from more of like older adults, so like more elderly folks. We've been seeing a more increase in like youth, which is a little staggering for us because when we're calling and the age ranges are much more younger than what we're used to, and we've been seeing that throughout the years that we've been at the crisis line. It's a little concerning, especially when we see the younger population, also the older population, two vulnerable populations calling out a service line like this, where it's a large concern. We're worried for the youth potentially, and we're just trying our best to mediate that, and that's why the Teen Link line is one, and then also like with Trevor Project and Crisis Text line, there's a lot more youth engaging those services, which can be a spot, but the concern isn't for whether, our concern is not whether youth are calling, but our concern is just why is there so many youth in crisis is a question that we're just trying to answer. So it's a lot. Our mental health system is definitely underway, and a lot of individuals in the field are burnt. So
Mhm.
this is it's really nice to have people that are doing this program like peer mental health navigators. It's really great. I mean, this is kind of the foundation work, especially when I'm going into whatever clinical, whatever academic lens is that this is kind of the ground roots. It's all these skills I've learned here is translated over to the skills I have now. So it's great.
Awesome. And Calvin, before you leave us today, I just wanted to also let everybody know, and maybe this is repetitive, so excuse me if it is, but even if you are not the person who necessarily needs the help, but you have questions about trying to help someone or locating a resource, 988 is also a resource for you. So if you are, let's say, encounter a situation where you're not really sure what you should do, but you feel the need to get some advice on that, you can also contact 988. Calvin, is that right?
That is correct. And I think something that is not talked about much too, like as peer mental navigators, you are going to be exposed essentially, secondhand trauma. Like a lot of people don't talk about that too. So taking care of yourself, and it's okay not to know the answers specifically in helping individuals. I mean, I know everybody here has a good heart with good intention of wanting to help the best they can, and sometimes too, it's just about trying to transition over to help having individuals that have the correct resources just to provide for them and just making sure you take care of yourself in that process. So 988 for emotional support, 211 for resources, but their general hours is generally 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. But 98 has resources as well. It's just 211 is more robust with their services. So, for example, like emergency shelters for 211 has more up to date. But 98 can definitely provide those resources, but 211 has more of like the comprehensive up to date resources as well. So, just those two numbers is really important just to have, and then yep, and that should be good.
Calvin, thank you so, so much for joining us today. I always learn something every time you come back. There's something new. So thank you so much. Um, and we're going to let you get part of your day back, Calvin. So thank you. And we're going to turn now to Shakira, who's going to, I think we're going to move beyond the Q&A. Or are we doing Q&A right now?
I think Stephanie, I think
Okay.
Monica says Stephanie has a question, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. I do have a question.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of youth, and one of the like mythologies that I've heard about 988 is that you'll be pressured into getting treatment or they'll track your location. And, there's a lot of people that aren't ready to ask for help and don't want to be pressured in that way. So, and I think it kind of is a question I had last week when we were talking about suicide ideology as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is like if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
And speak to that belief that calling 988 will end up in you getting pressured or not having the anonymous option.
Yeah, so one of the things about calling, and this is a great question actually. So when you call 988 and you're talking to a screener, specifically in the geographic region, the reason why they ask for all this personal health or all this personal information is, for one, they want to make sure that you're safe, and in case that, for example, that there is active suicide, that they could send, for example, like EMTs or law enforcement there, so they could actually actively help. But what will happen is, if you don't want to provide that information, we do actually track geographically a phone ping on where the individual is calling from, and that is only if someone is active suicide. We will send that to law enforcement so they do find them, and that's the only reason why we'll ask for that information. The pressured, it's not required to receive services. We meet individuals where they're at. That's the general standard for when phone workers are there, is that they're here to provide emotional support. We're not here to coerce or help or tell people to do specific things. until they're ready. So that's the kind of frame of mind that I like to think. And pressuring to receive services, it's one of those things where you have to meet individuals where they're at, especially when, like behavioral health services could definitely be stigmatized as and it's not okay to do, and it's culturally, it's always been like that in different cultures. And so just for that whole tracking purpose and just like sending law enforcement and you have to do that, no, you do not have to. You could provide no information if you want to as well, and you say I just want to talk to someone, but they should not have pressured you or say anything specifically regarding that, for sure. Hope that answers your question, Stephanie.
Think it might be a good idea for those of us doing this work to take the time, if we have it, to call 988 and have questions ourselves so we can be confident on what we're telling our communities when we're suggesting that they call, and they'll be, they won't be tracking you. You're just calling to get some information. But that's a practice I like to do, especially when agencies or groups offer interpreters and all that. I like for my community to know when I call, what is the first thing that happens? What number do I have to push? Who was on the phone? How long did it take to get an interpreter? All those things we can experience ourselves so we can better guide our community members in a time of need.
Yeah, that is right, Sandra. And I think Brandon has a question as well.
Hi, sorry, was I called on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was saying it is really important to let people know, especially people like in different communities, that potentially you will have police showing up at the location you're calling from or your house, because that is like really impactful to people and very much an important thing that people should be aware of before knowing if doing that is right for them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And ultimately, I do want to just say that just because, like, for example, since we do have locations or a general area on where they're at, that is from the cases that I've seen, it's very slim that law enforcement we will call law enforcement. It's a very small subset, and we won't generally disclose that unless we're like, hey, okay, you're mentioning you have a suicide intent plan, you have a means, you have a time frame, and they hang up the call, for example, we'll attempt to do a couple calls back. That'll be ultimately up to the clinician, so it won't necessarily be like if the individual is essentially experiencing a crisis, the ultimate resolution wouldn't be calling, for example, um, the police or law enforcement. That's definitely our last approach we want to do. There's definitely alternative routes to it, and it's for sure definitely important for people to know as well, for sure.
And I also wanted to just say, those of you might remember in week 3, we had Aaron von Fepp from the Mount Vernon Police Department, but was an embedded social worker who often accompanies those types of calls. And I think the more that we can do in terms of our advocacy and voting and what we can support at the local level, we will begin to see more of those types of programs. So that was a pilot that has gone well, but that's not the case in every area. And so I think that also speaks, if we want to change that, we also have to be working on advocacy to create that change at the local level too.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, let's thank once again Calvin for his time with us. It's always so good to see you, Calvin. You make us all so proud, and we're glad that we have a relationship with you so we can share some of the great work that you and your cohorts are doing. So with that, we'll bid you goodbye, and then we will talk to Shakira because it's Shakira time.
Awesome, thanks. We'll review. We've gone over lots of this around what are some of the characteristics of a peer mental health navigator, right? You all can be connectors for other. You can practice those healthy communication skills to connect, show empathy, compassion, listen to other people's stories using your curiosity and active listener skills. I think one of our greatest skills as leaders in our communities is to be models for positive behaviors for others and models for all the variety and diversity of ways of being in the world. And another thing we can model is practicing our self-care, knowing resources and how to help people find resources. I really love the point you made, Sandra, about we can make the call to some of these helplines so that we can know what that experience is like and what to expect before we help someone connect to one of these helplines. I think that's a really valuable sort of use of our time and skills. And peer mental health navigators are really open to and value diversity. And I've been blown away by this group and the ways that you all are showing up for the diversity of ways of being in the world and experiences around mental health challenges, especially. Next slide. Some of the things you can do, some of the ways you can help people, right, is connecting them to relevant programs and services, navigating the mental health system, either just being alongside with them or helping to demystify, helping them to have information. And I love, like Calvin said, it's okay not to have all the information. None of us can possibly have all the information. I've learned a ton today about 988 that I haven't heard as the rollout is happening. So staying tuned to learn more information and being humble when we don't know something and just saying it's okay that we don't know all the things. We can really help strengthen people's coping strategies and help them with goal setting and identifying where do they want to get in their life around their health and mental health, and how can we support them in getting there, and how can other people in their lives support them in getting there, and what resources are available that can help them get there. Next slide. And again, it is really okay not to know everything. There will be so many times where you're going to find yourself feeling unsure or not having the resources at hand. In those moments, pull back. Don't give advice if you're not sure, but you can always say, hey, I'll look into that, or we can look into that together and find some of those resources or next steps. Like we said, you can call 988 or 211 for additional resources or support. And you can connect to other mental health navigators and peer mental health navigators. It's cool to see Calvin come back and join us with his new gained experience and the ways that he continues to grow. And you all can offer that to each other. You are now a part of this community together. And some of the best we can do is connect with each other's for that support. And as always, you can refer folks to community mental health agencies or nonprofits for additional support and resources. Next slide. So let's do a little bit of this scavenger hunt in some of the few minutes we have left together. We'll pose some scenarios and ask yourself what community organization or resource might be helpful. And I'll read the scenarios and you can put in the chat what potential resources might be helpful. And if you can click from your technology on this link, or maybe we can launch it today in the slides. Let's see, does it work if you click it from the viewing? Oh, here we go, Noemi, I think just put it in the chat. All right, next slide. So here's a few scenarios. We'll just chat about one or two of them together. Let's say that someone you know is telling you that they're being evicted and they need supported or supportive housing. What resources might you offer to them, or where would you look for such resources? Go ahead and put in the chat. 211, yes. 211 and Snohomish County Legal Services, awesome. These are great resources. Other resources or places you might look for resources. HEN, yes, Housing and Essential Needs Referral Program. That's great. HEN has got such a multitude of resources built in there. The Opportunity Council, very cool. Community Action and Love Inc., very nice. Let's say a different scenario, that a person who cares for her elderly parents, I'm reading number 4, as well as her own family, and She could use some help to get over the burnout. So number 4, someone who cares for her elderly parents and her own family. So doing that intergenerational caretaking, and could use some help with her own burnout. What kind of resources might be helpful for that person, or where you might find some resources for them? Or what support can you offer them? Local senior centers, Homage or the Stilly Center Caregiver Program. Nice. Other resources you might offer this person? Look for some national support options for caregivers. Mental Health Matters in NAMI. Yes, absolutely. Maybe supporting them with some of the things you have all learned about burnout as caregivers. And actually that makes me think of some of the questions in the chat earlier. There was some folks sharing that it can feel scary as someone who has deep empathy to be in these caregiving and supportive roles, because there's a fear that we won't be able to cope with the heaviness that we bring home with us, right? So suggesting self-care for this person, because the care they're doing is in their own home, they might need to get out of the home sometimes to get a break, a respite, or some self-care. I think for all of us doing this work, some of the boundaries that we can try to hold internally about the impact of the work. I know someone who keeps an actual shoebox that she decorated by her front door. And whenever she comes home or after she's been supporting someone, she goes to that box and she imagines putting in there the feelings, the story, everything that she's holding of that person. So it feels like it can be held somewhere sacred, even if, you know, she's not holding it in her body, and she can always come back and pick it up later when she's ready, but she can put it down so she can go make dinner, be there for her 13-year-old in his life development. I know someone who taught me that I am meant to be a conduit, not a sponge. So my job is to take the energy, do something with it, be empathetic, be compassionate, find resources, and give that back to the person, but not to be a sponge that just absorbs it and gets so heavy myself. And I know someone else who thinks a lot about releasing rituals, like going to the water and releasing somebody's story or somebody's pain and giving it to nature to hold for you. I see, yeah, offering people coping or self-care plans, reading a story about a tree or a bush outside the door of the house that you can hang the worries on before going home. That's really beautiful. For me, it's helpful to have kind of a dedicated space or mind zone. Like if I'm supporting someone, sometimes I will do it while I'm on a walk, or I'll go to a particular space in my home that is for that role. And then when I leave, I try to shake it off physically, close the door physically or metaphorically on that part of me. How do I not become the sponge? I think knowing that, yeah, breathing. So even that exhale, giving it to the universe, dancing to music. I may have found myself at karaoke last night, and I'm not usually a karaoke person, but this was a really, it was a very small group of very friendly people, and I needed a way to release some heavy feelings and not hold them in my body. And it turns out karaoke might be a great way to release some heavy emotions, shaking the sillies off, literally shaking it off your body. Sometimes when you see the change and see the way that you're able to help someone, you know you've given it back to them and you don't have to hold it, that you've put them sort of on the path, or you've planted some seeds for them to get somewhere. Let's go to the last slide.
All
So
right.
Go ahead, Sandra. Yeah.
Go ahead. Jewel share that a really sweet comment, Shakira, that she can't hear your name call out without feeling like she wants to break into a song. It's taking me a while not to sing that song in my head. And we're so glad that we have share with our group your wisdom, your heart, and your experience, because I think one thing is to read something and another thing is to speak from lived experiences, because we all are in this together. So We have a couple of minutes left that we want to remind everyone. No, we don't actually. We're right on time. But we don't want to leave without saying thank you and inviting you to our Mind Fest, Caring for the Mind, Body, and Spirit. That will be happening, believe it or not, this Thursday already in Mount Vernon. And you're all invited. We hope to see some of you there, not just to enjoy all the offerings, but also to pick up your certificate and your gift card, and for us to be able to say in person, thank you for your commitment and thank you. Yes, your 5-year-old can go. Everybody is invited. So just remember, we're here and we hope that we continue to be in contact. Any trainings, any offerings that we find in community, we'll be sure to share them with you so we remain in contact. So back to our team. This is who's here for you and who has been here for you. And I hope that we continue to be in contact. Jody, any last words?
Just wanted to just say we're really excited about Mindfest, and we hope, as we talk about self-care, we've truly tried to make this a part of that. So give opportunities for community to experience. Our very own peer mental health navigator who's with us on today, Yurin Wang. Yeah, Yurin, do you want to say hi? She's going to be given a session that's for everybody at 5 o'clock to. Do you want to give a commercial really quickly, Erin, about that?
Yeah, so you don't need to have any experience, come breathe. We're going to do a lot of the shaking, the breathing that we talked about today. And we're going to do a sound bath, and we're going to, just invite some really grounding and releasing into our body. And come join us at 5 p.m.
So we'll have food, and we'll also have some therapy dogs there. We'll also have some puppies that will be making an appearance. So we've got a little bit for everybody. So we hope we can see you there. If you do plan on coming, let us know. We can have your certificate ready for you. And then just a reminder, if you're not able to make it, that's fine too. We will be planning on having a pop-up at one of our local libraries, and we'll be keeping you abreast on that and send you some information where you can come, pick up your certificate, your gift card, stamp a picture if you want, take a treat. And then the last thing is if you're not able to make any of those, we're happy to mail that to you. So thank you everyone for making this possible and for being a part of this work. If you all have any ideas or suggestions, remember that doesn't stop here. Some of our navigators want to get together and create an event, or if you have ideas about training or people who you think would be wonderful to give workshops, please let us know, because we want to support you in your the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yay! Yay, you, all of you.